the recording for the meeting and letting everyone in.
Thank you, Harvey.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the November 2020 meeting of the West County Dems. I'm Suzanne Couch, your co-chair. This morning, we can collectively breathe a sigh of relief that the reigns of terror caused by Donald Trump in the White House is at its end. The election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is a new beginning to usher us into a triumphant world. So many barriers have and will be lifted by this election that we will regain our status as a leader in the world order of progressive nations.
Democrats talking about the election.
Whoever, please mute. Please mute.
Mute me.
We have walked the razor-thin edge of becoming a fascist country controlled by a core group of politicians who were only interested in their own enrichment. The good old boys club, which relied on the status quo to keep the country living in the past, is no more. The election of a progressive president, along with many women and minorities, begins a new day. No longer will our lives be limited by what we are given. Now we can take our rightful place as a fully functional member of society. It was heartening to see Joe Biden take the stage Saturday night and to deliver eloquently a speech of inclusion and progress, and to welcome Kamala Harris as our first female African-American vice president. A news commentator watching her ascend the podium said, Kamala Harris, wearing suffragette white and her sorority pearls, becomes the most powerful woman in America. We're in good hands with this governing team, and they will soon restore order and civility to our country. However, this election did prove that we as Missourians have a battle on our hands to make this state worthy of the new order. Missourians, and not just outstate, made this statement that they will remain relics of the past and refuse to recognize change. The Republican sweep of the state legislature leaves us no representation for anyone who believes in progress. We need to recognize the outstanding effort of three of our members, candidates Deb Lavender, Helena Webb, and Bill Otto. The State House has lost the opportunity to hear their much needed voices, and we must work to not allow losses like these in the future. Thank you, Deb, Helena, and Bill. You made us proud, and thank you to all the members who donated, phone banked, address cards, hung literature on doorknobs, and did a million other necessary jobs for these candidates. Democracy depends on you. Please remember that we are still in the grips of the pandemic, but we have the most wonderful Thanksgiving possible. All right, now moving on. Gay is not here to give the membership report, but Jan is here to do the treasurer's report. Jan?
Suzanne, you want to approve the minutes somewhere?
I'm sorry.
I can do that. Please let's not make this an open meeting, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, our balance as of September 30th, 2020 was $5,625.48. We had revenue of memberships for $380. We had disbursements of $610.75. This included an honorarium, a donation of $250 approved by the membership at the last meeting, or 2 meetings ago, and the web hosting social media budget amount of $260.75. Our ending balance as of October 31st.
Wasn't recording it.
Harvey, please mute everyone except Jan.
Was $5,394.73.
Okay, are there any additions or corrections?
I don't know. He
All
said,
right,
he just
then,
asked.
please
Harvey's
everyone,
kind of running it
please
to meet everybody.
mute yourself. All right, our minutes of the October meeting were online. Are there any additions and corrections to the minutes? Then they stand approved as read. All right, Glenn, You're up.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Everybody mute yourself.
In case you haven't done this already, I sent in a written report to Mark and Suzanne and Karen, so that should be on the website by now.
Yeah.
The good news is we won the big one. The bad news is things are not going to go very well for us, probably for a while. The big hangup is the Senate. Even if we get to 50-50 in the Senate's tradition of how they operate is going to make it hard for President Biden to make any real progress, even on things we need to deal with right now, such as COVID. What's going to happen, unfortunately, too, it appears that the Senate will not approve aid to individual Americans. They're probably not going to approve future extra money for unemployment. They're probably not going to approve money that would help, say, small landlords get through the eviction crisis. However, they are probably going to help banks, airlines, and other big businesses. If you own a pizza joint in Baldwin, you're screwed. Simple as that. The United States Senate, the Republicans in the Senate, do not worry about you. Also, we have to remember the federal deficit is now $21 trillion. Remember how Trump said he was going to run America like a business?
Glenn, I'm sorry, you got muted. If you can unmute yourself.
Okay. But anyway, Trump ran the country like a business that's trying to fail, and we had that $21 trillion deficit. Unfortunately, that means that Biden is going to have to raise revenue, despite the objections of the Republicans. You just simply can't be spending that much more money than you're taking in. And in fact, we're talking about deficits now. I saw one report, Trump may have added more to the deficit in 8 months than Obama did in 8 years coming out of the recession in 2009 and all the way back to World War II, even when you adjust for inflation. In other words, dealing with Trump was more expensive than World War II. Also, the federal bureaucracy is a disaster. They have been pushing so many unqualified people. We know about Betsy DeVos. We know about the Postmaster General. But there are a lot of anti-government activists in there who are dismantling things like EPA, the Department of Labor's investigations, OSHA, and so on. It is going to take many years of hard work and probably longer than the President Biden's first term to get a lot of that damage undone. It's very easy to cancel regulations and get rid of them. To bring back common sense on things like EPA is going to take a long time. Another problem we're going to have, unfortunately, here in the St. Louis area, Cori Bush has aligned herself with the squad. That means that in 2022, every campaign for every Democrat running for state representative, for sheriff in Bollinger County, etc., is going to be targeted as a socialist. We now have a great lightning rod for the Republicans to use against us. I was surprised to learn that a woman I supported for state rep was actually a socialist. The problem is those of us who understand, first of all, what socialism means, know that's not true. The bad news is the Republicans have proven time and time again, if you keep saying the same lie loud enough and often enough, people believe it. Note that going to the state issues, Amendment 3 passed. Why? Look at the outstate vote totals by county. The Republicans told people to vote for it, and they did. So even though 62% of people voted for reform on redistricting, now we're going to have round 3 in 2022 probably to try to get it going. It also means there's a good chance we will not have the reforms we wanted before the 2022 election and the next round of deciding state rep districts and state senate districts.
They can't lose.
The other thing is too.
Please mute.
The other member too is that Nicole Galloway ran a very good race. She was obviously the better, more poised candidate. She had plans, and yet she lost. Partly because the same thing happened to her this time that happened to her in 2018 when she ran for auditor. Even though in 2018, she was running against an utter train wreck of a candidate, a woman who probably wasn't even legally qualified to be on the ballot, Nicole lost in almost 105 counties. This time, because Parson wasn't as bad as Nicole's previous candidate, Nicole could not run up the numbers in St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, and parts of Springfield to overcome that outstake. I was looking up in some counties, she got outvoted 4-1 in Chariton County and some of the other northern outstate counties. Now, we're talking about the federal money problems. This week, the Missouri legislature is going back for their second extraordinary session. This session is to allocate money for COVID relief. Ironically, a lot of people thought they had done that before they left in May. The other thing is the governor wants to do things his way, and his way is probably not going to be what's best for schools, roads, and things like that, how they allocate the money. There is also going to be a push by many Republicans to have blanket liability protection for businesses regarding COVID. Now, we're not talking about giving, say, a school district a safe harbor where they can show if they took reasonable precautions, worked hard to have everybody wear masks, and did other things to protect their staff and their kids. No, what we're talking about is absolute liability protection. So in other words, if you ran a nursing home and you knew you had infected staff working there, and this is something I found out, one of the great ways bugs travel in nursing homes, they don't adequately wash and sterilize the food service trays. When the food is delivered to the home or the room-bound patients, a lot of times those trays just get wiped down. They don't get sterilized. And there are people saying that may have contributed to the rapid spread of COVID in some nursing homes. Well, if some of the Missouri legislators get their way, those nursing homes that didn't do everything reasonable to protect their patients could have absolute immunity for their patients who got COVID. So that's what we're dealing with in Missouri. Now, the other thing is we can't count on Mike Parson to make anyone wear a mask. I was talking to a couple of our legislators over the weekend. They went to a restaurant in Jefferson City recently. They said you could tell the people from St. Louis and the Democrats. They were the 8 people in the restaurant wearing masks. Not the servers, not the cooks, not the guests. So without mask and without that attitude that we're going to all work together to solve this problem, Missouri is probably going to be one of the last ones to recover from COVID because we're going to have a lot of extra unnecessary infections because also people are probably going to be very non-compliant in getting the vaccine. And remember, even if that Pfizer vaccine gets approved this month, the experts have already told us it will probably be 18 months before we have enough people who have gotten their 2 shots in the population that we're going to be able to reopen. So we're effectively talking about the end of the 2022 school year in May 2022. So that's where we stand right there. The other thing in Missouri, I've been talking for a couple of years now about Missouri not joining the interstate sales tax compact so that Missouri could collect its already collected share of sales tax on internet sales. Well, we can see that very clearly now in the sales tax revenue numbers from the Department of Revenue. Despite the fact that Missourians are spending almost as much as they did before the pandemic, Missouri's sales tax revenue is only up 1.59% from last year as of the first week of November. What that means is as more and more people buy more and more stuff on internet sites from companies that don't have a Missouri presence, Missouri is losing sales tax revenue. So in other words, our old sins are coming back to haunt us again. Had we passed or accepted that interstate compact and accepted the money from the Wayfair decision, Missouri would probably have at least $150 million more to deal with a year now, perhaps because of the extra spending due to the pandemic online, perhaps $200 or $300 million more. So we are in a state which has made itself poor. We are going to see huge money problems. And that's the only good thing I can tell you is that it's warm outside.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, Sandra has a question.
Okay.
Yes, Glenn, do you think that is there any possibility of Missouri turning at least pink like some of the other states? Because we have a real serious problem if we don't.
No. I'm sorry, but just the mindset of the people who are in Jeff City is kind of scary. The people who are running things. Change is actually a 4-letter word to them. If you notice on Amendment 3, one of the tricks they put in there, they're going to try and only count adult eligible voters for aligning the districts. That means kids don't count, undocumented people don't count, probably prisoners don't count, and a bunch of others. That's the mindset. They are trying so desperately to hang on to power, especially for the rural areas.
Okay. Anyone
I have a
else?
question, Dennis Lavalley here. What do you feel? I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Dennis? Okay, well, what are the prospects for a legal challenge to that constitutional amendment in light of the fact that we have traditionally had the one man, one vote Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court? Will that at least at a minimum influence U.S. Senate and House, but can it also transcend to legislative district, council districts, et cetera?
I hope it will. Elad Gross is talking about a challenge along those lines. Plus, the Clean Missouri Coalition still is active. But the thing is, even if we can get that overturned, I don't know if that's enough to invalidate the whole vote. Remember, we have this crazy situation in Missouri. We make decisions and then they decide we didn't know what we were talking about.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Glenn.
You had a hand up there from Kathy Merrick.
Oh. Yes, Kathy.
Yeah, I also put it in the chat. You mentioned that you thought because of Missourians not taking the vaccine, even when it is available, et cetera, that it will be one of the last. Do you think blue states will be considerably faster?
I do, simply because in the blue states, we've seen more top-down support for fighting COVID. Basically, Mike Parson, even when he tells people they should wear masks, he goes out to events, rides a tractor in without a mask, shakes hands with everybody. That's a powerful message to outstate people.
I saw him go to his granddaughter's graduation without one and sit in the stands in the huge crowd.
Right.
Right after he said, wear a mask.
And the other thing too is, remember, he's been a big supporter of Trump. We're going to have a lot of people who believe, remember Trump said how Trump said magically COVID was going to go away on November 4th? I actually kind of wish that would happen, but it didn't. And all the data is so many people, remember Trump got over 70 million votes. There's a lot of people who at least think they believe him. And so.
Yeah. And also Mary Gross had something in the chat about how to get involved in Georgia. I would love to see all of us do anything we can to promote those two elections. Do you think that that will make a difference, or what would be the best way to participate in that?
I'm planning on working with some groups Phone calls, I don't think are as effective as they used to be because so many of us got so many phone calls and emails. But I think postcards, things like that. Remember, though, there's going to be a lot of big money spent on advertising. There was an article I saw online. They could spend $150 million between now and January 5th in Georgia on TV ads. You will have people praying for ads for erectile dysfunction and used cars because this is going to be, but the thing is, as Democrats, we can't give them the field. If we don't win those 2 seats, Mitch McConnell doesn't have to worry about, a tie-breaking vice president. We win those 2 seats to get the field.
There will also be a lot of social media activity through some of the Republican, well, the Democratic channels as well, but Republican channels with the emails that the Trump organization has collected and the RNC, and hopefully we'll be using that in the DNC side as well. But social media will be a big factor too.
Yes. And if any of you remember what your Facebook feed looked like on the 2nd of November, feel sorry for those poor people in Georgia. It is going to be, there have never been 2 Senate seats that are as consequential as those 2. And on a special election, the entire nation will be watching and the entire nation will be sending money. Anyone else?
Hey, I just want to add that there is a email out there from the DCC, and there is, for those who want to send money to Georgia to help, there is a 350 times, that your donation will be increased. And I will put that information on our, well, I'll send it to the website and the Facebook both, but also onto the I can't think of the name of it, the
group
other connection that we have.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Yes, we need to, one more question, please.
It's they're asking for money. If you give them money, what are they planning on doing differently than hasn't worked already? I mean, I'd be more inclined to donate if I thought it was going to go somewhere. Is it still the Republicans slander and all their ads, and the Democrats just say, we're really nice people and we're good? Have you heard anything about any different tack to be taken?
Unfortunately, that's worked for both sides. If you notice, Biden being Mr. Nice Guy seemed to help him. At the same time, in our local races, we had state representatives who had their opponents accusing them of part of being the squad.
Yeah.
That's just, unfortunately, there is no requirement in Missouri that what you say be true or be labeled as conjecture. So you can say that Joe Shoup was planning to join the squad. You can say that, Gene Prudhoe in South County was a closet communist, which was a rumor going around. A school board member and former teacher was a closet communist.
All right. Thank you so much, Glenn. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. We need to go on because our speaker is here. Erlaine, please do your program report and introduce your speaker. Erlaine? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Erlaine?
Wait, did it go through?
Now we hear you.
It wasn't, my mouse was not responding, sorry. Okay, first of all, glad to see all of you here today after the stressful last weeks. And there is some hope, as we've said, but there's a long, hard hill ahead of us, and it is pretty concerning. In that light, for December, I have Anita Mannion, Dr. Mannion from UMSL and St. Louis U, and consultant, I believe, for the media as for KSDK in the St. Louis area. She was the recipient of a 2019 Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching and for 2020 Excellence in Civic Engagement. So we're looking forward to hear from her. And as I have done before, I told her we'll finalize the topic, and using her expertise and whatever is the most current thing going on at the December 14th meeting are some of the things she will be addressing. Also, this got put in. I was contacted and they asked me to mention that tomorrow night, the Chesterfield Township, and it's online available, has Charles Jaco speaking to them at 7 o'clock tomorrow night, in case you would want to tune in and see, because we had Charles as our guest previously, and see what he thinks now. And for 2021, we will plan to have a few of the people back, like Dr. Jones and Charles Jaco and Tony Messenger, because they have been very popular and well received. And we also have a list going of 8 or 10 other speakers from our area that we are going to be booking. And so we hope that no matter how long we're meeting on Zoom, and it does have some advantages, and no matter how long it is before we can actually assemble safely together, which we hope for, that we will keep our group together and meeting every month and in contact, so that we don't lose track of each other. And that's certainly our goal, and to keep you informed and interested. So now going forward to our guest for today, Dr. Jones, who has spoken to us before. I want to welcome him. He's Professor Emeritus, and he's the internship coordinator. His PhD is from Georgetown University, and he's the author of 3 books: The Metropolitan Chase, Politics and Policies in Urban America, Why St. Louis Has So Many Governments, which is a real hit, and Conducting Political Research. He's had many articles. He is a member of our own community and dedicated to our being well informed in our area and bringing us his slant on what's been happening. So I'd like you all to welcome Dr. Jones now. Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Elaine. It's good to be with you. Hey, Janet, thank you for that round of applause. See you clearly now. And thank you, Glenn, for that very cogent, although not necessarily encouraging, explanation of what has happened and what might be happening. Let me start by saying I'm a fellow Democrat. I think many of you are already aware of that, but I'm in my election analysis mode today. So I will be trying to provide that perspective, and I will also try to be relatively brief with some observations so that we can have the most time possible for a Q&A and your reactions as well to what happened this week, not simply on Tuesday, and actually this month, in terms of, because the voting has been going on for about that period. The first thing that we should all say, and I am now back in my democratic mode, celebrate. We did not really, I think, sufficiently realize how difficult it is to beat an incumbent president. And that is, there's a lot of history that should have told us that. The last time that it's really happened in a clear-cut way was Herbert Hoover in 1932. The defeat of Jimmy Carter in 1980 happened after the Iran situation, happened after there was significant opposition to Carter for the Democratic nomination, happened when we had, remember that term, stagflation. The defeat of George Bush in 1992, George Bush the elder, was sufficiently contributed to, not simply by all the foreign and economic difficulties, but also by having a third-party candidate, Ross Perot, which all the analysis after the election showed drew more votes away from Bush than it did from Clinton. So we had a big assist, if you will, in winning that presidential election in that year. So the fact that we not only won, but we won convincingly, the Democrats did, Right now, it's close to 4 percentage points. When all is said and done, it'll be closer to 5 percentage points. When all is said and done, it'll be over 300 electoral votes. This is a clear victory for the Democratic Party and for its candidate, Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris. It also adds to our coalition, at least potentially, with Arizona and Georgia. And it shows that we are reaching out to additional states other than the ones that we've dominated in the recent past. Now let's talk about the content of that vote, of what we can learn from that. No big surprises, but certainly some reminders. As the percentages I'm going to give, and I won't give too many of them, I'll not try to drown you in numbers, are coming from a thing called AP Votecast. We think that's, we being the political science community, think that's going to be the most reliable source of information about who voted for whom and why coming out of this election. It's a bit different from the exit polls. I won't go into the differences other than to say that's my source. It also is a work in progress, that is to say the data is still being gathered and brought in. So what I will be throwing out a number here and there. It might end up, those will be off by 1 or 2 percentage points, but the story they tell will be the same. So that's the more important point. And the bottom line is, the biggest interpretation is that Trump might be dead and gone in terms of politically, but Trumpism is not. And I'm defining Trumpism as a nativist vote that has a populist tone in it. It's nativist both in tone and reality. It's anti anybody except white. It's anti anybody except somebody who is born in America. It's anti anybody who doesn't think that our policies abroad should be anything else than America first. It's populist in tone, but not in reality. The reality, of course, is the top 1% have never done better than the 4 years of the Trump administration, but that's certainly not the tone that the rhetoric of the Donald Trump and his allies take. It's that they have the people's wishes, the middle class workers' wishes, always into account. But that split is broad. The splits are broader than ever. If this were a vote in which only whites participated, we would have lost by over 10 percentage points. If this were a vote in which only men participated, we would have lost by over 10 percentage points. And the list goes on. So the fact that the election demonstrates, as did the 2016 election, as do other elections, that a majority of whites are being dragging and screaming into a multicultural society is still there. And the Republican Party is more than ever a white party. But whites still constitute over 70% of the electorate in the United States, closer to 75% of the electorate. So that's still a base for them from the start. The other lessons that can be learned from the numbers deal with the education difference. That first came onto the stage in a major way in 2016. The split between people with college degrees and those with less than a college degree being in the double digits, low double digits, 10% to 15%. That continues, and that indicates, again, a fear of the knowledge economy, a fear of the transformation in our society, a fear of anybody other than whites. As an aside, when all the tea leaves were settled and all the analysis were done after the 2016 election by political scientists, finding out what was the single best variable to distinguish between Trump voters and Clinton voters, and the answer to that question was not economic resentment, the fact that the economy was a knowledge economy, the manufacturing economy had declined. The key variable, the one that explained more of the difference than any, was racial resentment. People who resented the fact that being white no longer brought, or for their perception brought, the privileges that it once had. The urban-rural split is bigger than ever. And indeed, that's one of the things that really jumps out from the VoteCast data. The urban vote, think Central City in our context, think the city of St. Louis and the inner suburbs going out to roughly, say, Lindbergh. That was 65% Biden. The small town vote was 43% Biden. The rural vote, and I think unincorporated areas of outstate counties, was 33%. And Glenn was reciting some of the Galloway figures from those kinds of counties in Missouri. We also have the sharpest split ever, it seems, by religion. An increasing number of Americans define themselves as secular, either by saying that or through their behavior. Those individuals, these are individuals who do not belong to any organized religion, do not engage in any kind of regular worship service. Those individuals were 63% for Biden. Evangelicals were 17% for Biden. You do the numbers there, you have over a 30% gap, actually well over a 30% gap. So those are some of the chasms now in our society that we're dealing with. So we're not simply polarized by party. I'll come back to that in a moment. Those party polarizations are sitting right on top of several other divisions in our society by where we live, by the religion we practice or choose not to practice, by our gender, by our race, etc. The party, one key number that comes out is that roughly 4% of Democrats voted for, let me take a step back here for a little footnote. Although over a third of Americans say when asked, generally speaking, do you consider yourself to be a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or what? Over a third say independent. Most of those individuals are not independents because they typically vote with one or the other party. And so political scientists and pollsters more generally then ask a follow-up question of the independents: do you lean more towards the Democratic or the Republican Party? And about 80% of them do answer, yes, we do. And of the remaining 20%, by their behavior, many of them do. To their credit, in my judgment, the AP VoteCast went down to that level. So when it talks about Republicans and Democrats, it's counting those leaners in, those leaning independents. So you're left with 5, 6, 7% of the votes that are pure independents. And even we're a little suspicious about that. So going back then to the over 90% that really are in one camp or the other, 4% of the Democrats voted for Trump. 8% of the Republicans voted for Biden. So if you want to look at the margin and say what really links up very closely with that, it was that Joe Biden was able to attract a slightly higher, a double of the share of the Republican vote than was Trump from the Democratic vote. Now let me say some words about the state of Missouri and then St. Louis County, and then a couple of lessons that I learned and others I think have learned from this, the 2020 elections. It's not all that far. I'm looking at my screen here. I see people who are not as old as I am, but are close. So we can all remember the year that we really changed. That was clear that Missouri was no longer a bellwether state and that it had become, at that point, at least pink, if not close to red. And that year was 2004. When, as you remember, those of you who are veterans of the Democratic large D process in the state, the Kerry campaign pulled out mid-October. It just gave up on the state. It was not only giving up, it turns out, on 2004, it was giving up 2004 going forward. Although the Obama did very well now, in retrospect, especially very well in 2008. Okay, it's no news to say to you, we are a red state. The 2020 election just confirmed that we've stayed red. Trump got 56.9% of the vote for president in Missouri this time. He got 56.8% in 2016. So we didn't become redder, but we're pretty red and we've stayed pretty red. We all are very aware that we all lost the statewide races. They weren't even close. The margins in the General Assembly have stayed the same. Reporters from other parts of the country asked me, we in political science become very popular for a couple of weeks in November, then people will forget about us soon and I can go back under my desk and take a nap. But they asked, well, what's happened? Why aren't you like North Carolina or Georgia or Arizona or maybe even Texas? Why aren't you moving away from red and towards blue? And the answer is our demographics. Over 80% of the Missouri electorate, about 85%, is white still. We're about 10 to 15 points behind, if you will, the rest of the nation in the transformation into a multiracial society. And we have relatively little in-migration. One of the reasons that states like Arizona and Texas and North Carolina and Georgia are moving is that they are having a substantial number of in-migrants from, in the Georgia's case and North Carolina's case, largely from the Northeast, in Arizona and California and Texas, largely, although not completely, from California. We don't have any of that in-migration to speak of, not in any net noticeable numbers to affect voting outcomes. The Amendment 3 story, we can take that up. Glenn has already covered part of that in our when we talk Q&A. I think whenever you lose, and if you were on the no side of Amendment 3, you were a clean Missourian and a clean voter, and I count myself among that number. Even though the ballot wording got changed between the legislature, the circuit court in Jefferson and Cole County, and then finally the Missouri Western Court of Appeals, when it came back to what the Western Court of Appeals did, it was not ideal ballot wording. It was misleading ballot wording. And so I think we can attribute that as to the single most important factor. We did not get good wording. But the bottom line is it's over. The redistricting that would have affected is going to be the one in 2021. While you can make an effort to get it back and change it on 2022, and I'm not discouraging that, as a practical matter, that would not have any impact until 2031, the next time we'll be doing districting. It'll be tough to raise money and raise volunteer help for an effort that's not going to have its payoff for almost a decade. St. Louis County, on the other hand, is a bit bluer, but only a little bit bluer. Trump got 56.8%, pardon me, 39.0% in 2016. That was down almost, but not quite 2 points to 37.3 in 2020, this year. And St. Charles County also went down 2 points. But that was, in retrospect, a disappointment given the expectations going into the elections. The national polling was showing a shift of 5 to 10 points in the suburbs from Republicans to Democrats, not simply in the presidential race, but also in the generic congressional races. And according to the vote cast, that shift didn't seem to occur. Seemed to be in the neighborhood of 6 to 7% nationwide. St. Louis County and St. Charles County did not participate at nearly that level. Instead of having a 7% shift towards federal congressional candidates and towards the Democratic presidential candidate, we had more like a 2% shift. And that, more than anything else, is why Jill Shoup lost. It has nothing to do with Jill Shoup or her campaign. It has to do with the fact that the shift that was nationwide was not nearly that level in Missouri. So for West County more particularly, I think the results indicate it was a hold steady year. You retained some of the gains you've made in the past. Trish Gundy was reelected. Deb Laveder's seat was held by her successor, Barbara Pfeiffer, but it was not an year of gains. Elena Webb's seat, she got about the same percentage in 2020 as she did in 2016. And as we're all aware, Deb fought the good fight and fought it better than anybody that I've ever seen, but still lost to Andrew Caney. Just one lesson, two lessons that I want to that I've drawn, and many others from the 2020 cycle. One of which I think very much applies to us in Missouri. The other is a little less. So let me talk about the lesser one. And that is the Latino or Hispanic or Latinx vote in the United States. And I am not an expert in this area, so I consult with the Joseph Jamail Professor of Latin American Studies at Rice University, who is one of the foremost experts on Latin Americans in the United States and their political behavior, and who also happens to be my son. But also one of the virtues of the vote cast is that its sample size is over 100,000. So it enables some very fine-tuned breakouts, not simply Latino or Hispanic, but Cuban American, Venezuelan American, Mexican American, and so forth. The Democratic Party both has to pay more attention to the Latino vote and has to incorporate Latinos more in the decision-making process. They've been doing some of that. That needs to be accelerated. And we have to really stop talking about aggregating it as the Latino vote. As the numbers become larger, and they are becoming larger within segments of the Latino vote, we really should be talking about the Puerto Rican vote, the Cuban American vote, the Mexican American vote, and stop this over aggregation into Latino. By all reports and by all analysis, many, if not most, Latinos are also not happy to be lumped in that way. The other lesson that does apply to Missouri is that we've gotten a very clear indication of how much the ground game matters. And the ground game here being defined as face-to-face contact. We as a party did the right thing from a public health standpoint. We did the right thing from an ethical standpoint. We avoided contact face-to-face because of the pandemic natures. Well, we paid a political price for that because the research that's been done shows that it's not by far, but by a noticeable amount, the big difference. And this is the biggest way to persuade others. And we were not able to do that. We chose not to do it, again, for honorable reasons this time. We won the presidency despite that, but we lost other races because of that. And we need to, as soon as possible, as soon as it's safe, get back to that. That's going to be especially crucial in Georgia for those 2 Senate races, and how that is handled, how you can have face-to-face contact in a safe, mask, social distance way will be one of the challenges the ground game will have to address in Georgia. Thank you all very much for your attention for a few minutes. I'll be happy to answer questions. Suzanne, are you the MC here in terms of recognizing people for questions?
Actually, we're going to let Harvey do it because he has the control of the Zoom.
Hi, Harvey.
Well, hi, Dr. Jones. How are you?
I'm fine. Yourself? Don't call me
Good. We
Dr.
have
Jones.
one question that came in. What happens if Trump doesn't want to concede the presidency?
Well, it doesn't really matter. He's not the decision maker about whether or not he's president or not president. So we move on. The thing that does matter is the rapidity with which the Biden transition money comes into play and the transition support. And so that's the thing that I worry about the most. What Donald Trump chooses to say or not to say is irrelevant at this point.
Okay, we have another question from Maureen Jordan. Can you comment on the House races that were lost? Were they too progressive or too moderate?
The answer is that each House race has to be tailored to its particular electorate. If we're going to be a majority party, and we are in the House, and if we're going to retain that majority, we have to have the recognition of and acceptance of and getting along with one another of having some seats that are going to be very progressive in nature, and in terms of their members and their constituencies, and others that are going to be more center left, and others that are going to be centrist. To the second congressional district, for example, is at best a centrist district, if not a slightly right of center district. As an aside, this is, I think, our last shot at it. This was our best shot at it, and one of the consequences is that on the next redistricting, the one that will happen next year, I would be shocked if the Republicans do not shore up that district by shedding Democrats from the second district on its northern boundaries into the first district, which will need to pick up some population. But rhetorically, Democratic members of Congress understand the need to have a civil tongue and a cordial relationship with their colleagues in the Democratic caucus. Living that day by day is sometimes difficult, as we saw in the reporting on the Democratic caucus meeting this last week in Washington.
We have another question. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. What do you think the effect of conservative talk radio is on the rural areas? And is there any way to combat that?
The answer, the impact of the talk radio, and for that matter, Fox News, in the rural areas is enormous, and not simply in the rural areas, but especially so in the rural areas when it comes to talk radio. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I would go with the latter. We are all believers in the First Amendment. So we're going to have to fight this battle of ideas with the knowledge that false ideas are out there. Misinformation is rife. Social media contributes to that as well. But censorship of that information is not the route to take to make things better.
Another question is, how do we get white men to vote their best interests instead of voting to preserve a 19th century view of the world?
Well, let's talk it to a white male, okay? How about you, Harvey? What are we going to need to do to get your vote?
Oh, you already have mine. That's a really good question. It goes along with another question. Do you think the entire country is center right or center left? Is there any movement that you see nationwide in either direction?
It's difficult to give us, first of all, I didn't mean to duck, as I seemingly have, that first question. The answer to that is having a better understanding of that by people who are white and people who are male, and then put those two together, white males, of the severe cost our society incurs with racism and misogyny. The talent that is wasted. And then at a more personal level, how behavior reflects that and the hurtfulness that behavior causes. And that for all white males, that's a work in progress. And although some might question the word progress, and it needs to continue. That's why being sarcastic about being woke is so insidious. That's why the elimination in the last few months by the Trump administration of programs to help people understand this better and work through it better is so damaging. Some, indeed many, large corporations have realized that. More need to do so. So it's a big challenge for our society more generally. Now, back to the other question, Harvey, would you repeat it?
Oh, is the country moving center? Is the country overall center left, center right, and do you see movement in either direction?
Recognizing that any single answer to that question would need to have nuanced qualifications, we're not moving at all.
I would agree. That seems to be how it feels right now. Although we do have
in either direction.
Yeah, very polarized. That goes to another question here. What can the Democratic Party do to get the rural vote to understand they are voting against their best interest?
Well, ever since the book, What's the Matter with Kansas came out now well over 10 years ago, which directly addressed this question using Kansas as the geography to raise it. The answer also is, what can we do who live in suburban and urban areas to recognize what threatens and also motivates people in rural areas. So it's not as if we approach this issue of they need to change, we don't. That's not necessary, or they need to understand, we already do. That's not going to be a helpful starting point.
I agree. Let's see, another interesting question is, how strong do you think Mitch McConnell's hold is on the Senate and thereby the country right now? Do you think there'll be some Republicans who will start to buck his rule?
At their peril, I might add. No, I think Mitch McConnell rules with it's a velvet glove, but it's got iron underneath it, and he will continue to do so. Again, the Georgia situation, while not hopeful because of the normal drop-off in terms of type of voter between a presidential election and a runoff election, but still hope. I have hope in both those. He also is looking at a 2022 set of candidates in terms of incumbents on the Republican side that favors mildly the Democrats. So he's going to have to balance lots of interest in his approach.
Another question is, well, this implies, so I'm going to ask it a different way. Do you see a young, talented exodus or an exodus of young, talented people from Missouri? And if you do, what can we do to keep more of them here?
The answer is the data are, first of all, not as robust as we would like to make definitive or to provide definitive answers to those questions. The drain seems still to be going, a brain drain still seems to be going on. That's actually a little higher among African-American college graduates than it is among white college graduates, because this is not seen as a racially tolerant community, seen as backward in its attitudes on many of those matters. So those populations are more likely to be going to the Sun Belt across the country, North Carolina, Georgia, all the way across to California and Arizona. Efforts to say, well, let's keep more of those SLU grads or more in more greater numbers. The Washington U grads here have not been too good. The whole Cortex effort and the venture capital for startups has made a difference, but those levels are at anecdotal levels. and not at, are not in the, they're in the hundreds, but not the thousands in the number of individuals they're influencing.
Anyone else with a question? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
Dr.
you, Suzanne,
Jones.
and thanks to everyone here. Good to see you all.
Yes, thank you. All right,
Thank you very
everyone.
much, Terry.
Yes, everyone, we're about ready to go, but we need to tell you that Circle of Concern is putting out an emergency call. They need our help. Money would be great if you can do that, if you want to bring items there, whatever you can do to help Circle of Concern. Okay, any other comments, anything for the good of the cause? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.